So love them or hate them, the corporations and brands around us help shape the economy. They put money in our pockets and put food on our tables, as well as creating all the things that we use every single day. But will this always be the case, or is the sun setting on the era of the corporation? And if our economy really is changing, what is it changing to, and what will be our role in it? Welcome back to the Disruptive Innovation Festival, where we've just started week 3. They're getting a bit better, the guys in the studio here. They're responding to my cues a bit more readily these days. We're just starting week 3 of Disruptive Innovation Festival, the world's biggest online festival of ideas. And today we're going to be joined by 2 people to help us understand some of these big shifts taking place with the economy. This is firmly in our 21st century economics theme here at this year's Disruptive Innovation Festival. And firstly, we'll be speaking with Jerry Davis. Jerry's the Associate Dean for Business and Impact at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. And he's been tracking the decline of the American corporation. So we'll be finding out what's going on there, why the American corporation is disappearing. And then we'll be speaking in the studio here with Laurie Macfarlane, economics editor at openDemocracy. And Laurie's been looking at the 2008 financial crisis, like a lot of people have, but Laurie's been finding out what we can actually learn from that crash, how we could restructure the economy based on the learnings from that event that sent the world into turmoil about 10 years ago. Welcome to both of you, and thank you for joining us virtually and physically here at the DIF. We're going to start speaking with Jerry in just a moment, but here's first a reminder. We do need to hear from you throughout this session. Over the past 2 weeks of the DIF, you've been fantastic in sending in your many questions and comments throughout these live sessions, so please continue to do so. There are 2 main ways to do that. You can use #ThinkDiff on Twitter, or you can use the comments box that's just below this live stream. So do send your questions in, and we can put them to Jerry and Laurie as we move through the session. So first, Jerry, speaking to us from Ann Arbor in your library there. Let's have a chat about the American corporations. I had a quick look at the FTSE 100 today, obviously this side of the pond, and it was AstraZeneca, British American Tobacco, BP, BAE, Barclays. As you can tell, I didn't get particularly far down the list, but there's a lot of familiar names in there. It seems like some of the big corporations are staying put for a while, certainly around my neck of the woods. So what is actually changing?
Yeah, so there are some familiar names that stick around for a long time, but many others have disappeared. So in the US, think about large retail chains like Circuit City or Borders. You used to have Borders. Think about Westinghouse, Eastman, Kodak. A lot of familiar names have disappeared on us. So the big transition is that about half of the public corporations in the US have disappeared over the last 20 years, and they're not coming back. So that's sort of the headline story, is they're just evaporating, and that's a strange thing.
So those, when you say they're not coming back, obviously you don't mean those specific corporations aren't coming back. You mean they're not being replaced by similar types of business?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Actually, if you want to switch to the slides, I could show you a couple of pictures of what this looks like.
We're just going to try and get those up on the screen now.
Yeah.
There we go.
All right. So the number of listed corporations in the US has dropped by half since 1997. And what I mean by not coming back, we look at these and we think, well, this is the dot-com crash, or this is 2008. It's not just that. It's been this ongoing shift where publicly listed corporations have been disappearing in the US. And it's not just because they're all getting bigger that one giant company is vacuuming up the rest. There's a lot of complicated stories behind it that I don't want to go into in detail. But it's not just one single cause. There's a handful of things behind it. What I mean by not coming back is if you look at companies going public, initial public offerings, that is also not coming back. So in the 1990s, there were hundreds and hundreds of IPOs. If you look in the last 5 years, there have been about as many as there were in 1996 alone. So companies aren't going public. In fact, startups are not what they used to be. The number of startups in the US per capita has been dropping for the last 30 years. So we talk about entrepreneurship all the time, but we're not really seeing it in practice. We're not seeing anything like the rate of startups that we saw even in the 1980s. And that's kind of crazy. And if you look at the companies that are going public, nobody actually works at these companies. So nobody works at the IPO companies, and most are not going to last long. So you hear politicians saying we need more startups and entrepreneurship because that's where all the jobs are going to come from. But that really isn't true. If you add up the global workforce at Zynga, LinkedIn, Groupon, Zillow, Yelp, Facebook, Tableau, Zulily, and Box, it's about 41,000. That's fewer than the number that got laid off when Circuit City was liquidated in 2009. So Facebook is not going to be a job of new employment. Tableau, these companies that people are familiar with, hardly anybody actually works at them. You might say, yay, this is great, small is beautiful. That's what I would have thought, stick it to the man. But it turns out that this is creating a whole lot of problems in society, particularly in the US. So unlike the rest of the civilized world, like yourself, you have the NHS to provide health insurance. We had General Motors. In the US, starting at the end of the Second World War, healthcare, retirement were all funded by employers. You got health insurance because the dad of the house worked at GM. And that's going away in the US. When big employers disappear, the health insurance system falls apart, which is part of the reason why we're having such debates about it now. And it also is a problem for the middle class. So one of the reasons why we might have liked corporations was that they provided large-scale employment and career ladders. And if you look at the US in 1960 and 1980, it's companies like AT&T, GM, Ford, GE, giant companies where people were going to work there for life. And they had a chance at a career ladder moving into the middle class like all of my grandparents did. Fast forward to 2010, it's all retailers. 9 of the 12 biggest employers are retailers, and they don't have a career ladder. They have a step stool. You might be an assistant store manager at Walmart, but you're not going to move into the middle class working at a job like that. So it's really a problem for creating a middle class. If you don't have large-scale employers with career ladders, you're not going to have a middle class the way that we traditionally did. It's also the case that it's easier to regulate big corporations. When they misbehave themselves, you can have OSHA or the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to knock them into shape. And that's much harder to do with tiny companies or small startups. Big companies are just easier to regulate. So I'd conclude this saying that we're in the throes of this foreseeable social disaster, particularly in the US, where it's going to evaporate the middle class. It's eliminating economic mobility. It's creating giant holes in the social safety net. So I would have said, stick it to the man, yay, be rid of these terrible corporations. But something else is happening. Without these big corporations, we need to find some alternative to create stability and a reasonable middle class.
Thank you, Jerry. That was a whistle-stop tour through your kind of central argument that the US corporation, at least, is on the decline. I just want to pick up on one slide that we don't necessarily need to see it again, but one that you run through quite quickly about the many different reasons for corporations disappearing. Can you give us a quick summary of that? Why do we think they're going away?
Yeah, so over the last 20 years, we saw the dot-com bubble collapse in 2000. That led to a whole bunch of companies disappearing, like Lycos and Dr. Koop. The pharmaceutical industry is concentrating. The banking industry saw a whole bunch of failures. The electronics industry got entirely offshored to China. So those are sort of a handful of things that happened to these 4 core industries. But the bigger issue is that during the 80s and 90s and 2000s, companies got very good at offshoring and outsourcing and finding ways to hire other people to do their core work. And so it's now possible, if you want to start a business making flat screen television sets, you can rent all of the parts. The biggest TV brand in the US is Vizio. They had 200 employees in 2010, and they beat Sony because they basically rented factories in China, distribution channels. You can rent someone to do your payroll, can rent someone to come in and act as temp employees to do drug tests or what have you. So if you can rent all of the parts for being a business, why be a major corporation? Why not be a pop-up on a grand scale? So it's a bit of a psychedelic point, but to start a business today, all of the parts are sitting there like Legos. You can snap them together and take them apart. So there's not really the same call to be a large-scale employer the way that we used to have.
And that actually sounds, if I was thinking about setting up a business now, that sounds almost quite appealing, not just because I like Lego, but because it sounds like there's quite low barrier to entry there. I can maybe it's less of a gamble, maybe less investment. Are founders and entrepreneurs now being drawn to that for those reasons, drawn to this way of doing things, this pop-up way of doing things?
Yeah, so that they are, but not nearly in the numbers that you might expect. So as I said in the Whistle Stop tour, the rate of startups in the U.S. has been going down for 30 years. It's crazy. It looks really easy. It should be, if you're sitting at your computer and have a credit card, you could start a business right now. You can incorporate in Liberia right now. You can go to Upwork and hire contractors to do programming for you. So it looks really easy. But most of those businesses aren't going to succeed. If you want to write a clever new app that's like Tinder for pizza or something like that, you can do that. It does sound kind of interesting. But there's 2 million other people writing apps, and only a few of them are actually going to succeed. So it's easy to start, but it's also easy to fail.
And is that part of the story as well? That some of big names are. You mentioned Circuit City. There are some big names that are disappearing from the landscape, but also the actual lifespan is changing. If you're setting up a business now, there's no guarantee you're going to be around in 5 years' time.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the list of startups or IPO companies that I had there, I would be surprised if half of them still existed in 5 years. So people start up and they disappear and we kind of forget about them. But the failure rate is very high for public corporations now. And so that means they're not able to make the kind of promises that they used to, which is stick with us, we'll take care of your health insurance, we'll take care of you in retirement. They can't make those guarantees anymore because they're not likely to last that long.
So just a minor tangent here. We get quite a few kind of entrepreneurial folks watching the diff, tuning in. That could sound a bit of a bleak future that they're setting up, and they probably won't be around in 5 years' time. Is there a different way of doing business that might improve their chances in the 21st century?
The way that I think we need to make this whole thing work is to get a social safety net that looks more like Denmark. So we don't do startups independent of what else is going on in society. If you start a business and the risk is if it fails, you lose your health insurance, you can't retire. I mean, in the US, if you don't have an employer, you probably don't have health insurance. And so if your startup fails, your kid doesn't have health insurance, they break your leg and they go into bankruptcy. And so that's a problem in the US. A system like Denmark, if your business fails, everybody gets 80% of their wages when they go on unemployment and they train for a new job. So to make it appealing for entrepreneurs, you have to have a social safety net that provides some basic level of safety, something that makes it so that it's not catastrophic if your business disappears on you. And in the absence of that, I mean, it's risky to be an entrepreneur, but it's life-threatening to be an entrepreneur if you don't have a social safety net in place.
Okay, so what you're not saying necessarily is that we should find a way to prop corporations up and make sure that they stay part of the economy. And in fact, you ended your presentation earlier by saying they aren't coming back. So you're proposing that there's the thing that is in the place of the corporation isn't just a different type of business. It's some sort of policy or some safety net to plug the gaps. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think corporations per se they're expensive. They have expensive headquarters, they have overpaid executives, they're a costly way to do business. And so if you can have smaller, more locavore versions that can accomplish the same thing, the corporation's not going to be the best way of doing business. But that transition is going to be pretty rocky. What it looks like is going to be pretty tough. So right now we've got this entrepreneurial ecosystem that encourages people to create apps for on-street valet parking or sending disappearing pictures of your junk or what have you. We've got the tools to create this amazing democratic future that could provide for people, but we've connected it to a funding system that encourages them to provide products for 25-year-old guys. So that's one of the problems.
And who should we be talking to if you could bend the ear of a group of people or individuals? Who would you be telling about this? Who would you like to be advising to make some of these changes that you're suggesting?
Yeah, in the U.S. it would be the Senate. They're considering a terrible budget bill that would destroy the economy in the not too distant future. But a lot of it requires national level policy to enable this new economy to be given birth. So as it is, our systems of regulation are oriented towards large corporations like GM or AT&T, and we really need to be thinking, what are the institutions to civilize the economy for the 21st century, where it will be much more provisional and small scale?
Thank you. Just a quick reminder to our audience watching online, if you've got questions for Jerry about these twilight years of the American corporation, then do send them in, and we can put them to both of our guests throughout the rest of this session. Jerry, one final question from me. Obviously, you've spoken about this from the North American, the US point of view. What is the story for the rest of us?
So the story is much the same in the UK. Public corporations are disappearing in the UK in the same way that they are in the US, because it shares a legal system, not quite the same pathologies like with a broken healthcare system, but the UK faces many of the same pressures. If you believe shareholders rule the corporation and that they should be managed in the interests of shareholder value, you're going to see the kind of things that are happening in the US. Corporations, I think, increasingly disappearing. That's not an issue in Germany, and China's seeing the opposite. There are tons of new corporations being created in China, but it's in a really different stage of capitalism. So the story varies around the world. I would still hold up Denmark as an example of a place that's doing it in a civilized way that has both the old school giant corporations, but also a pretty vibrant startup scene. And the hope is, you don't want to vest things in corporations growing to live for a century. That made sense in the 20th century. That was the way to organize the economy at that time. But we're moving on to something different. We need a more forward-looking view of what regulation will look like and what we expect from our businesses.
Thank you, Jerry. So if you're setting up a startup, either move to Copenhagen or we can maybe do the hard work and try and restructure our economy to make this innovation ecosystem work a bit better. We're going to take a quick break where we hear about some of the other stuff that's coming on at the Diff. Do stay tuned because in a few moments I'm going to be speaking with Laurie Macfarlane about what we can learn from the financial crisis of 2008. But for now, have a chat with Molly and she's going to tell you what else is coming up at the Diff.
Thanks, Joe, and hello to everyone online. So as we're heading into the final week of the Diff's 3 weeks, there's a whole bunch of sessions I'm really looking forward to, and I want to let you guys at home know about a couple of them. So in the future, maybe robots will be rounding us all up, or maybe we'll be sipping cocktails by the pool while the gadgets sweep our streets and stock our shops. So join us at 5 p.m. tomorrow. Where we'll be joined by a robotics researcher to explore which of these futures we might have in store. And then on Wednesday at 11, we'll be joined by award-winning architect and ecologist Ken Yang, where we'll be imagining a city that's as vibrant and healthy as a forest. And then on Wednesday at 1 p.m, we'll be in the live studio, again, where we'll be exploring how we can change how politicians and people think about the economy to overcome these barriers towards a real paradigm shift. And now remember, you can watch any of the sessions you've missed or the ones you want to watch again at thinkdiff.co. And don't forget to head over to our Twitter where you'll be updated, always be the first in the know on what's coming up, when and why you should watch it. But remember, this is a conversation. We love engagement. And the best way to do that is to hashtag ThinkDiff on Twitter, where we'll be keeping an eye out for all your comments and questions. Thanks a lot, and back to you, Joe.
Thanks, Molster. I hope there's some tantalising sessions that people can be tuning into throughout this final week of the Diff, or catching up with some on Diff on Demand. And if you're just joining us, we've just been speaking with Jerry Davis about the decline of the American corporation. And now we're going to be speaking with Laurie Macfarlane. Laurie, thank you for sitting so patiently and listening to Jerry talk about some of the changes that he's seeing in the economy. And economic change is what you're all about as well, aren't you? You've been taking a look at the financial crisis of 10 years ago and thinking about what we can learn and the changes that we might be trying to make.
Absolutely. I think it's some of the things that Jerry was talking about there. I think it's really interesting to kind of zoom out a little bit and put this in the wider context of where we're at the moment. And believe it or not, we are now 10 years on, actually, from when the global financial crisis first made its mark on the world back in 2007, when sort of shockwaves were sent around global financial systems. And what I think is interesting is we had the initial kind of economic dislocation and damage straight after that, with bailouts and things going really in the crisis mode. After that, we then had that kind of turn into manifest itself in social dislocation, when you had the effects of that then ripple through society, but then with the response of austerity, etc. And it's really taken us, I think, about nearly 10 years for that social dislocation to kind of manifest itself politically into political dissatisfaction. And I think although the reasons are complex, I think we can't ignore phenomenon like Brexit, like Donald Trump, with other things. We can't ignore the economic circumstances and the economic context which we are in. And I think that the financial crisis has been key to that, and to understand where we're at and where we need to go. I think it's really important to reflect on what caused the financial crisis, what were the forces behind that, and reflect on whether we've learnt the lessons of that going forward.
And there's a lot of, in the past 10 years, it seems like there's been so much discussion about kind of almost, have we recovered from the crash? Have we not? What I'm getting from you is that a no, really. Or that the implications of it are more deep rooted than just what's happening to GDP growth.
Absolutely. I mean, firstly, I think have we recovered? I mean, certainly no in the UK. I mean, real wages, just to give one example, wages after inflation fell by 10% between 2007 and 2015 in the UK. So people are much worse off on the whole. But in terms of what do we need to be thinking about in terms of causes? I think it's really important to stress that the financial crisis wasn't just a kind of shock from God, wasn't a kind of lightning bolt shock that just hit us that had nothing to do with anything we were doing. Similarly, it wasn't just a kind of a technical oversight. It wasn't kind of just a bit of lax regulation here or there that really just somebody had their eye off the ball. It really was a symptom of much deeper forces that had really been building up over time, for decades actually, since the 1970s and 1980s onwards, where we had a real reshaping, remoulding of the kind of economic system which we live in the UK, in the US and others, really focused around a number of key ideas. One of which was that forms of collective organisation, collective forms of ownership, whether that public ownership or others, or forms of collective social organisation, things like trade unions, were kind of shunned away from in favour of a much more individual outlook. So that was replaced by the individual consumer, by the entrepreneur, by property owners, for example. The other key idea was around the supremacy of the market, that the market was the kind of the best way of organising society through, and market logic was best kind of penetrated into as many parts of society as possible. The third bit was around the firm within that the best way, the best model of enterprise to organise our economic activity was firms operating in a profit maximising incentives. So facing incentives to maximise return to shareholders and very little else, operating within a competitive market. And lastly, just around the state, where the state was really viewed as something that was kind of an administrative, facilitating, almost regulatory force that was a bit of a burden on the economy and is best kind of kept reduced and constrained and kept in its box as much as much as possible. And the idea was that with this system, you'd have a kind of dynamic entrepreneurial economy where people can, if they work hard, they can start their own business, they can flourish, everyone will own a share in lots of the companies that are kind of being privatized, and that was the way it was supposed to work. And I think we reflect on how things have actually turned out, it's rather different. So if we show the first slide that I've got, which I think is just one illustration of what's happened, and this shows the evolution of the banking sector in the UK over time from 1960. And you can see that back then there was lots and lots and lots of different institutions. This is just a selection of them. And what's notable about them is lots of them are focused locally on specific areas. There's also a large diversity in terms of business models and ownership. So you have mutual models, you have cooperatives, you have savings banks, as well as your private shareholder banks. And over time, you see vast concentration to the point where we were left with a handful of large, huge multinational corporations focused on profit maximization. And at the same time as this, you have the scale and influence of the banking sector exploding. Sort of back then, banking was a relatively boring profession. Nobody really wanted to do it. Didn't have much of an impact on society. Whereas it grew to become the biggest part of our economy in the UK and the most influential as well. In parallel, and this is just the banking sector, but this is replicated a lot across other sectors. And in parallel to this, you have wealth flowing upwards. So you have a system whereby the average worker, the average person, their lot isn't increasing that much, but an extreme concentration at the very top. And if we move on to the next slide, I think this chart that I'm about to show is one of the most interesting and informative charts that's come about in recent years, and it's very famous. It's called the elephant chart for very obvious reasons by the shape, and it's by an economist called Branko Milanovic. And it plots the entire global population across the x-axis, from the world's poorest on the left to the world's richest. And it shows how incomes changed between 1998 and 2008. And what you see is that the large chunk, all on the kind of left and middle side, have done pretty well. And this is largely because of what's been happening in China, because of the population there. The second thing to note is this at number 2, whose living standards have actually not increased or have actually fallen. And this is predominantly the middle, lower classes in places like the UK and the US who just haven't done well out of this system at all. And then, of course, on the right, you have a small part of the global population who've done very, very well. And this is the kind of global 1% type situation. And what's interesting as well is that the people on the right-hand side who've done very well have largely got their reward, or have largely got reward not necessarily from doing things or working things, but increasingly from owning assets, so owning property, owning financial assets. And I think that the financial sector is really the poster boy, if you like, the kind of poster boy example of these changes over the recent decades of market liberalization, of markets really kind of running wild, very, very focused on the short-term gains, making short-term speculative gains with a focus on making short-term returns, regardless of what the impact might be on other society, and on increasing polarization and concentration of wealth and power. Mm-hmm. And so I think if we reflect now, have we fundamentally moved away from this 10 years after the crisis? I think it's quite clear that we haven't. And in many ways, we've kind of doubled down on that model, and we have, in many ways, the same or worse situation today. And I think we really need to reflect on the fact that there's two paths, I think, in front of us. One path, I think, looks very much like a world with more Donald Trumps and more Nigel Farages, as well as, of course, the big elephant in the room, which is ecological and environmental breakdown. And we have another alternative path, potentially, which is building something that is a bit more inclusive and environmentally sustainable. And I think the task, I think, for all of us is to kind of help build that alternative path.
I just want to pick up on something you mentioned a moment ago. You described some of the features that were maybe in place building up to the financial crisis. When we kicked off the diff 2 weeks ago, we heard from Anne Pettifor, and when I was reading her bio out on the stage at our launch, we said, she's one of the few people who predicted the financial crisis in 2008. Is all this a lot easier with the benefit of hindsight to identify what went wrong? And is that kind of the point of what we're talking about today?
I mean, I think it's always easier to reflect on things with the benefit of hindsight. But nonetheless, before the financial crisis, there was lots of people not necessarily predicting a crisis. I think the financial crisis was the kind of the major shock moment. but it was really the function of lots of different things that had been building up over time, and there were lots of people making these points at the time. I think the financial crisis was just a wake-up call where most people realised, look, this is clearly something clearly not right because it's impacted so many people.
Because it does feel a little bit like that we're in danger of taking our off the ball again. Because we think, we couldn't really, it wasn't very easy to predict it the first time, and things for some people have settled down a bit. It's in the news a bit less. So I guess it's easy to think, well, let's get back to business as usual, and that's. I guess that's really what you're saying, that we need to not do that, and business as usual is what led to some of the issues in the first place.
Exactly, and I think there's a real risk, particularly in the UK, but also in the US, it's even worse, where Donald Trump now is seeking to roll back many of the limited reforms that were introduced after the financial crisis in order to try and rein in some of this behaviour. It's now looking to get rolled back. But I think the big risk is that in the UK and other places, the financial crisis was viewed in the context of this was a big shock that happened that nobody could have predicted. It was nothing to do with necessarily fundamental problems, and that can be dealt with by technical fixes to regulation. Right. We can regulate a bit better. We can make banks hold a little bit more capital and all the rest of it. And I think that overlooks the kind of much broader fundamental processes that were at work, of which the financial crisis was just one manifestation of. And as for where we are just now, I think we're at a real risk of not learning the lessons, and the consequence of that, I think, is what we're seeing in the political sphere. We're seeing people, it's no coincidence that people are voting for things that shake up the establishment, whether it's Brexit or Trump, because the living standards have fallen. In the US, it's incredible. The median worker's income is barely any higher than it was kind of 30 years ago. In the UK, it's not too different. As I said, real wages fallen by 10% since the financial crisis. And that's not even taken into consideration when you have house prices and housing costs going up much higher than inflation. People realise that their chances in life are worse off than they were before. And I think the answer to this isn't just saying, let's just go back to, before the kind of post-war settlement where, as Jerry was saying, you had corporations that were taking care of people, you had this kind of post-war social democratic consensus. I think that's not going to cut it anymore. And in fact, we need to be thinking about moving on to something different that's fit for purpose for the 21st century. It's fit for purpose to meet the challenges of the 21st century, which are different to what they were back in the post-war era.
For those of you watching online, we've got a few good questions coming in, which I'm going to get to in just a moment, but do keep sending them in, and we'll put them to Laurie and Jerry in just a few moments. Laurie, you just mentioned a minute ago that you saw links between some of the evidence on those graphs about centralisation of resources in a way and wealth flowing upwards. You saw a link between that and environmental and ecological issues. What is that link in your mind?
Well, I think fundamentally at the moment the unit of organisation, which is the kind of cornerstone of our economies, is business and the corporation. That is the kind of primary mode of enterprise. And this is an institution that's been around for a long time. It was invented in Britain. And the incentives inherently ingrained in that organisation that people face is to maximise shareholder value. And it's a very narrow incentive to maximise shareholder value. And there's a lot of evidence that incentivises short-termist behaviour, for one thing, whereas our environmental problems, for example, are long-term. We need to be thinking about long into the future generations. But secondly, I think having just a duty to care to shareholders. Shareholders are just one stakeholder that companies have to engage with. They also have to engage with their customers. They also have to engage with their employees. And increasingly importantly, they also have to engage about and should care about the natural ecosystem, the natural environment that they're operating within, because that natural environment isn't something that's kind of separate and external. It's absolutely fundamental to their existence, to our existence as a human species. And so I think we need to be thinking much more carefully about how corporations and other institutions can have environmental considerations ingrained fundamentally in their corporate governance, in the way that they operate as institutions, whereas at the moment it's something that's just completely separate and they don't really think about. They just think about how can we maximise our quarterly shareholder return so that we can get good results and we can get big bonuses.
Going to turn to a few questions now from our audience. I've got some coming in for both of you that pick up on some of what you're saying there and bring in a few other topics as well. So firstly, B. Johnson on the Think Diff website. Thanks for your question, B. Johnson. What advice does Laurie have for Theresa May? It's quite a big one, isn't it? Do you want a moment?
What advice do I have for Theresa May? I mean, I think we have a budget this week, for example, and you know, the other kind of elephant in the room, which the government is obviously dealing with, is Brexit, which is perhaps the biggest kind of challenge for a government and the civil service for a very long time. So putting Brexit to the side, funnily enough, I actually think that Theresa May, at least from the Conservative Party stance, was actually on to something in the election manifesto which didn't do very well. Because in that manifesto, she actually recognised fundamentally that this idea that firms should only respond to shareholder value is a problem. And there's a really good quote in that manifesto where you could think it could have come from some kind of radical thinker, where it says, you know, firms should have a duty to serve a wider range of stakeholders, including their employees, including their customers and the environment. And she's also talked about having worker representation on boards. And so she had kind of got this idea of having a much wider, broader stakeholder approach to business. But her scope to kind of move ahead with that has really come under a lot of pressure. But I think I would encourage her not to give up on that, because I think that she was onto something. And this is something that the Labour Party have picked up in a different way and are running with, particularly in terms of increasing the role of cooperatives in the economy and different types of enterprise that perhaps have a more social purpose at root. And I think that's a really important part of thinking about how we build an economy that's more fit for purpose for the 21st century.
Mm-hmm. And on the policy point, Jerry, another question here from Felicity, also watching it on Think Diff. Felicity says, you're both describing problems created by poor policy, such as a no safety net for entrepreneurs, loose regulation of banks, austerity. This is a US-centric analysis. And the question is it the case that we get government so wrong in these countries? Was that the root cause there?
That we get government so wrong. Yeah.
Maybe the question is, how have we got it so wrong?
How have we got it so wrong? Yeah, I might have to defer to Laurie on this one, but in the U.S., we have a system that gives money a lot of privilege in ruling the elections, and so we have now a set of rogue billionaires who have an amazing capacity to guide our electoral system. We have people in Congress saying, I can't vote sensibly because my donors would abandon me. So I'd say that there's money in politics is definitely corrupting things and pointing things in a particular direction. And it's a direction that favors the 1% and not the rest.
Similar story?
Yeah, I think just to highlight as well is that the UK and the US, there is a historic consistency here in the sense that the process that I described, the changes that took place in the kind of 1980s in particular and onwards, were really pioneered in the UK and the US. The kind of neoliberal revolution through Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. And these countries, in particular the UK, but also the US, have kind of taken this on much more than other countries. And we kind of forget that actually there are varieties of capitalism. So in Germany is a very different model. They actually have a very different kind of capitalism, a more stakeholder form of capitalism. In Japan, it's very different. In China, it's different as well. In Scandinavia, it's very different with much better socioeconomic outcomes. And so I think it's just about recognizing that we have gone down a specific path in the UK and the US, which has meant that these features have been much more prominent than in other countries. And we should be learning, absolutely, from where things are working better elsewhere. And I think Scandinavia, as Jerry's already mentioned, is one place to look, but also increasingly over in Asia. We sometimes have a risk of having a very kind of Anglo-centric view of the world, forgetting sometimes about Europe, but also forgetting about what's happening in Asia. There's some really interesting stuff happening there, and I think we just need to be learning from that as much as possible.
A couple more questions. These really pick up on some other trends or words that people might be seeing on the diff schedule, but also widely discussed in online and in the papers. Felicity again asks specifically to Jerry, could the safety net that you were speaking about before, could that be universal basic income? It's a hot topic, and maybe Felicity thinks it might be the answer.
Yeah, that's one of the unique ideas that people on the left and the right both love. So you have sort of extremist libertarians in Silicon Valley that love a universal basic income, and you have people of the left who say we need to have a core safety net, as a function of being a citizen. So that feels like an idea with legs, that it's something that has that is not identified with just one side of the political spectrum. So if you get Silicon Valley and Wall Street bankers and folks of the left all agreeing this would be a sensible path, that feels like it's got some legs politically. The downside is figuring out how you fund the whole thing, and is it used as just a bait and switch where you hold out this idea of universal basic income as a cudgel to get rid of the rest of the social safety net, like a universal healthcare system or means-tested income supports.
Thank you, Jerry. And the other, we had a diff session last week, I think, on platform co-ops. And is this something that could play more of a role? If we think that we need a different form of business, is platform co-ops part of the answer?
Absolutely. I think one of the really interesting developments in our economy of recent years is the emergence of what's called platforms, or this new kind of form of organization, platform capitalism, where the classic one being Uber, but also others as well. And there's a really interesting debate at the moment around, firstly, are these platforms that exist today, like Uber, actually sustainable? Are they something that are going to be around for very long? Because surprisingly, that actually when you get an Uber journey, when you get in and you get a cab somewhere, you're actually only paying round about 30 to 40% of the cost of that. The rest of it's being picked up by venture capitalists who are ploughing money in at a loss leader rate in order, with the ultimate aim of monopoly, because they think that ultimately Uber becomes a monopoly with automated cars, and it's the most loss-making company basically in history ever. And so there's some people that say, actually, this model just isn't sustainable, these kind of platforms, and they'll actually not be around. Then there's those who say, well, actually, if they are going to be around for a long time, how can we make them work better? And I think the answer certainly is sort of repurposing cooperative model, which has been around for centuries, for the 21st century to meet these kind of new digital challenges. And actually, I used to work at the New Economics Foundation. They've just launched a big campaign raising money as well to actually start a new platform co-op cab company in London, because Uber just lost its license.
Of course, yeah.
And there's a kind of development process going at the moment about developing a business plan to replace Uber with a new cooperative model. But the question for me is, which I think is really interesting, people like Uber because it's cheap. The reason it's cheap is because it's making a loss, because venture capitalists are subsidizing it, and because it plays games with regulatory arbitrage, because it doesn't treat its employees as employees and it exploits them. So if you do away with the subsidy from venture capitalists, and then if you also do away with the exploitation of workers and pay them properly, Uber isn't going to be that cheap, and therefore it uses its uniqueness. So there's a question as to how useful will that be versus the cab companies that already exist.
Well, Jerry, you when we were speaking before this, you had an estimate in terms of how long you think Uber will be around for. You think it might disappear as well?
Yeah, I think Laurie is exactly right about this. His analysis that every cab ride is being underwritten by venture capitalists is true. I mean, it's kind of ironic that the claim that shareholder capitalism leads corporations to be quarterly focused, that doesn't apply to Amazon, which has an eternal, it's Amazon Uberalis is kind of a model for them. Uber is the same way. Venture capitalists are saying in the fullness of time, we can create a monopoly or self-driving cars, and that will be Uber. But they're not making profits. They are making giant losses. It does feel like, how hard would it be to create the software for a platform? I mean, once you've seen it proven with Uber, why not just have every town create their own version of the Uber platform, have some white box software that's adapted to local situations? But Laurie's also right that if people were fully charged for how much it costs to do those rides, it would be a lot more expensive than Uber is currently.
Thank you both. We are approaching the end of our session here, but I just want to finish. The people watching online know that I love quizzes here at the Diff. So I just want to end with a quick quiz on corporations, which hopefully you'll be able to see on screen now by the magic of technology. I haven't got a jingle for this quiz, unfortunately. Sorry about that. Okay, a quiz is... Laurie, I apologise, because Jerry does maybe have a bit more of an advantage. This is kind of his wheelhouse, but you can have a punt as well. So first up, what's the average lifespan of a corporation? Go on, Laurie, have a guess.
I'm going to go for 3 years.
3 years. Jerry?
I'd say 12.
Oh, you had the option of 3, 10 or 18.
Oh, sorry. 10.
Bing, bing, bing. The expertise is coming in helpful here. Yes, in a very interesting journal entry on the mortality of companies in 2015, they figured out that regardless of kind of sector, the average lifespan of a corporation was about 10 years. But next up, some old companies, some old businesses. I spent quite a bit of time on Wikipedia. Of the 66 companies listed as being founded before the year 1300 that are still going, 12 of them are A, breweries, B, blacksmiths, or C, brothels. Jerry, what do you reckon?
I'm going to go with breweries.
Breweries, he's a beer lover.
I would have said the same, but because Jerry said it, I'll go for blacksmiths.
Not blacksmiths, unfortunately. They're breweries. There are lots of booze-related businesses that have been around for a long time. Wine, beer, and loads of pubs, especially in Ireland, have been around for ages. So maybe that is something. If you want to stick around for a long time, then set up a pub. Jerry, this one did make me think. Is there something in the survival of a corporation that is linked to whether it could be replaced by automation? I mean, I haven't had a robot pour me a pint yet, so is there something in that?
Yeah, exactly right. At some point, we're going to have web pages replacing corporations. So you'll have algorithms that can call on resources to get stuff done. And it'll happen first in manufacturing, but it's also going to spread to service. So they won't have employees, they'll have contractors. It's kind of, imagine that the Uber model spreads to business, and people sign up to do shifts and get the work done, but they're not actually employees. That's increasingly feasible in the future. And I think that comes at the expense of corporations. They're meant to have a long lifespan. It doesn't make sense to go to stockholders and ask for money if you're not going to last for at least a few years.
Thank you. And my final question in the corporation quiz. Which has more employees? A, Walmart, or B, the People's Liberation Army of China? Laurie, what do you reckon?
It's got to be the Army of China, I think.
Jerry, what do you think?
I'm going to say Walmart, 2.3 billion.
Oh,
you're
very close. According to my research, Jerry, which did take about 10 minutes compared with yours, which probably took a bit longer than that, I saw that Walmart had 2.2 million and People's Liberation Army of China with 2.3 million. So
I'm going to declare that a tie, because I think look at the latest 10K, you're going to see 2.3. So we both win.
You both win. But that's
a cooperative solution.
That's a lot of jobs that could disappear. So I think it reinforces that point earlier that you were making, Jerry, that it really isn't just a good, let's stick it to the man type answer. There's something we need to do a lot more thinking to figure out what needs to be in place when this major way of structuring the economy, when it actually changes. Okay, so thank you all for watching online and asking your fantastic questions during this diff session. Thank you to Laurie and Jerry for joining us. And in the past 45 minutes, we've been speaking about some of the changes that are happening right now under our feet. Ways that we are restructuring the economy, or that we're able to change the rules of the economy to deliver something that creates long-term lasting prosperity for more people. Keep tuning in to the diff. You've got 5 days left, and after that you'll have about 30 days to catch up on all the diff you like with the Diff On Demand feature. But for now, that's all, and we'll see you next time here at the diff. Bye-bye.